Welcome to the Broken Graciously podcast, where we challenge the culture of brokenness by exchanging beauty for ashes holistically, with candid conversations, transparency, and practical tips. I'm your host, Tanisha B. Lester, lovingly known as Coach T. I'm a Master Certified Life and Business Coach, Certified Christian Coach, Certified Pastoral Counselor, and published author. I look forward to engaging with you in the comments as well as on IG. Follow me on IG at Tanisha B. Lester with the number 1. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Welcome to another episode of Broken Graciously, episode 3 to be in fact. So this week we're going to talk about identity. So last week, if you caught the episode, or if you didn't, go back and catch episode 2 on healing for your soul. So last episode, just to recap really quickly, I talked about healing for your soul, and I even referenced the song by Kelly Price, which was a song that I listened to over and over and over and over again. Because it had a lot of importance for me. It spoke to a lot of things that at the time I was dealing with. So this week, again, we're going to talk about identity. When I'm speaking of identity, I'm talking about not just the words we ascribe ourselves, like mother or sister or aunt or, worker of such and such a place, or girlfriend or wife, or I'm not talking about any of that. That's not to say that that's not your identity. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is there's a deeper identity. There's a more grounded and rooted identity that we carry that's more important. In saying that, I will say that I didn't know what that was. I went 40 plus years without knowing who I was. And that may seem strange. It may seem crazy, like whatever you choose to say. It may seem like all of those things. So imagine what it felt like to me when someone would ask me, "Who are you?" It was a difficult question for me to answer. And it shouldn't be, but it was. I would sit there and I would stumble over words, trying to come up with an answer that would seem feasible to whomever I was speaking. But it was never, it just made me feel uncomfortable. Like really icky in my body. And you would think that that shouldn't be the case, but it was. So, consequently, I would say I'm a mom. I'm a postal worker. Whatever. I'm all of those things. And when I think about, really, really think about it, my identity was really wrapped up in, 1, materialistic things, and 2, just being a postal worker. Because, honestly, postal worker and a mom, that's all I had going on. That was it. So that was my identity. So when it came to the time when all of that was gone, I suffered. I suffered a lot. At my own hands, of course, but I still suffered. So maybe you in particular, or someone you know, has their identity wrapped up in a role of who you are. When the time comes for that to cease or transition to something else, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a real hard time. I know plenty of people who, and I was one of them on some levels, wrapped up in being a mom. Like, your kids are your everything. You eat, breathe, and sleep your kids. But once they're out of the house and you become an empty nester, then what you gonna do? Because you don't know yourself well enough to say, okay, I like this thing, I like that thing. I can go do this as a hobby. I can, do this, that, and the other. Most often, it becomes an issue because you don't know who you are, because your identity was wrapped up in other people. But you can't sit with yourself because you don't know yourself. I'll even go as far as to say you don't like yourself. I ain't like myself. And I'm not trying to project my feelings onto anyone. But I've seen it. And I recognize it. I understand it. Totally. Sympathize, empathize, all that. Having any of those things taken or lost for tragic reasons, loss of a job, loss of a child, like anything. It doesn't have to be tragic. It could just be a loss, period. For me, that loss was getting injured at work and being forced out of the building. Not that I was supposed to be forced out of the building because, having been injured on the job, they were supposed to provide me a job position, accommodating my restrictions. But I digress. Having lost that and being faced with putting all of my things in storage because money's ran out and having to move, it was traumatic. It was real traumatic. And not only that, I was faced with not knowing who I was, faced with not having these things to distract me that made up my identity. I didn't have any of that. So now it was, okay, well, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? What can you do? Who you want to be. Because, when you move, well, my first thought was, well, I'm moving. Okay, cool. I can be anybody I want to be because nobody knows me anyway. So the possibilities of me remaining the same, I don't have to. The possibilities seem endless. However, what you gonna do, girl? You don't know nothing else. You left your children. You left your job. Like everything you've known is in another state. Now you need to figure it out. I was uncomfortable. I was scared. And I didn't quite like sitting and just, ruminating or trying to figure it out. It was a lot. I think for me the biggest, the day I really, really broke, is the day I went back to New Jersey to clean out my storage bin. My storage bin was 10 by 15, 10 by 20, whatever it was. I opened the lock, threw up the gate, and I realized my entire life was in a box. That's a hard reality to face. Like, everything I had worked 20 plus years for was in a box. I was reduced to a box. That's all I could think. That's all I had. And here I am coming back to this state that I've left to get rid of all of this stuff. I worked hard. Now I know it's materialistic stuff. Yes, it can all be recouped and all of that. But just think about the fact that if you had to look at your life in a tiny box, all of your possessions, all of your accomplishments, like all of that in a box. That's a lot. But that also, as heartbreaking as it was, that also was the breaking point. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back. And it sent me to, not sent me to, but it was the catalyst. Let me say it that way. It was the catalyst for me to start to figure something else out, figure out who I am. Because certainly my life could not be reduced to a box. It couldn't be. It just couldn't be. Like, it had to be something else. I didn't know what the something else was. I just knew it had to be more to my life, what I wanted to experience, than what I was currently standing there looking at. And that was the beginning of my being sick and tired of being sick and tired and needing to figure something else out. Namely, figure out who I am, where I was going, what I wanted to do, and what else life held for me for the rest of my life. Because it couldn't have been just that. That couldn't have been the end all to be all. It couldn't have been. I had this innate feeling, this innate knowing, intuition, sixth sense, whatever you want to call it. I had all of that. That there had to be something else. I didn't know how to get to it. I didn't know how to find it. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't know what it was going to turn out to be. I didn't know any of that. I was certain that I could try. I was certain that it was going to be hard. I was certain that it wasn't going to come easy. There was going to be trial and error and probably a lot of tears to come along with it. That part I didn't lie about at all. That was totally upfront with myself about that. I probably cried more than I thought I would on plenty of occasions, but nonetheless, all of that happened. So I needed to find out where my identity was. Now, having grown up in the church, you hear plenty of things. God says you're this, God says you're that, God says the other. But there was no way for me to like really connect the dots. Like it just didn't feel like it pertained to me. It just didn't feel that way. Right? Have you ever sat in church at any point and it felt like they were just talking about some people? Like it just didn't pertain to you. That's how I felt. So I could never really connect the dots between what the Bible said and who I was. It just never made sense to me. And I guess that comes from growing up in denominations that were rooted in traditions. And they didn't really explain to you the truth of the word. And I mean, when I say the truth of the word, I mean like the real context of it. Aside from them using it to push their own agendas. Because that's what I felt about church a lot. My feeling is still the same in certain regards and certain contexts, but that's how I felt. So there was always some sort of disconnect between me and what the Bible said. So at some point, there came a time where I can tell you exactly what happened. I got bamboozled by this challenge some years ago. It was a pray for your spouse challenge. Well, you know, I'm not married. I want to be married. That's most of us, our dreams, right? So I got sucked in. I went to this challenge and it was an offer for you to take these classes to learn how to be the one. Well, when you go into the classes, like it was more about you than it was about being the one, seemingly. So it talked about a lot of things. Woo, I promise you I didn't get past the second module because it was just too much. Too much. Like it was getting too personal for me. I didn't come in here for all of that. That was my sentiment. I didn't come in here for all of that. I didn't come in here to be bashed, kicked in, and none of that stuff. I want you to tell me how to find a husband. That's all I want. But I stuck with it. I put it down for a while, but I stuck with it. That right there was a turning point for me because it allowed me to sit with myself and really see myself. It was a lot to swallow, but it allowed me to see myself and know that, girl, you got issues and you really need to figure it out. I don't know how you gonna do it, but come hell or high water, it need to happen. And that was a starting point. So they were affiliated with this church, and I didn't know anything about the church, never heard of the church before. So there was actually a sister church, whatever you want to call it, here in Georgia. So I decided to tap in. So remember I said oftentimes I didn't see the connection between what the Bible says and me as an individual. And I had many questions, and over the years, I would ask the pastors that I sat under questions because I wanted to know. But no one ever really had an answer for me. The answer they always gave me was pray. And I don't have nothing against prayer, but sometimes you need a little practicality to go along with it. So I will always pray, but I need some practicality too. And I found that that's the case with everyone I've encountered, clients and all. Clients and friends. So I digress. I turn into this virtual church service, and no lie, the first time I heard that man open his mouth, he was talking about gifts, spiritual gifts. I've been in church all my life, so I heard it before. I know what gifts were. I didn't know it pertained to me, because again, I didn't see the connection between me individualistically and the Bible. So he's talking, and I'm sitting there, and tears begin to roll. I cried like a baby, because for the first time in my life, I heard a preacher speak, and he answered questions that I had had majority of my life in the span of an hour. That was like the craziest thing. Like, how come no one else could ever answer these questions, but this man just answered every question I've ever asked in the span of an hour? That seems ludicrous to me. But it made so much sense. So much sense. He talked about gifts and how we all have gifts, and that's part of our identity. And I was like, wow. Like, my context of gifts from growing up in church was these things were just for the special people. Like, only special people were pastors and teachers and, prophets and all of that. Only those people. It didn't account to everyone. It just didn't have anything to do with everybody else. But that wasn't true. So hearing that and understanding it, and I mean really internalizing it, that was a game changer for me. That was the start of me digging into the Bible to actually find out what my identity was. Who does God say I am? And to dig into scripture and find out that there's this God who's intentional and purposeful when he thought about me. And I mean, thinking about me before my parents even laid down to have intercourse, right? Thinking about me so to the point of knowing what gifts he was going to place in the recipe, knowing what coloring he was going to place in the recipe, what her hair would look like and her name would be, and like all the ingredients to make up this being that would be called Tanisha. That was comforting. Surprising, but comforting to know that someone thought about me to that extent, that someone loved me to that extent, where I had spent 40 plus years feeling unwanted or unloved and unappreciated and all the other things. Like I didn't matter, like nobody really cared, like I was a burden. But to know that was big. That was really big. So I'll say this. And I'm going to conclude this episode. I don't know what you're feeling. I don't know if you have felt this way, or even if you know someone that has felt this way. I'm glad that you have tuned into this episode, to this podcast, to hear that there's truth. You're not just the roles that people have assigned you or that you have assigned yourself. You are more than that. You are beloved. You are a treasure. You are important. You are purposeful. You were created on purpose, with purpose, and for purpose. God loved you so much that he created you. That he was specific about creating you. There's nothing about you, hair color, eye color, none of those things were happenstance. None of those things were solely based on genetics. Yes, genetics plays a whole factor in all of that. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm not even talking about any science right now. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the creator of the universe. I'm talking about the one true and living God. I'm talking about that one. That's what I'm talking about. Because from the basis of that, all other things come into play. So I want you to know that. I want you to affirm yourself in that. You were created on purpose, with purpose, and for purpose. So look, I'm going to end this episode, and I challenge you to look in the Bible and see the characteristics that God has assigned to you. I'm also going to challenge you to do something else. I wrote a book, and it's called Arrested Development, A Journey to Discovering Identity and Purpose. It chronicles my story of actually finding my identity and my purpose, which is basically what we're talking about today and in the next episode. You can find it on Amazon. It's also on my website at tanishablester.com. Go check it out. I implore you to go check it out. So, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Broken Graciously, the podcast. I will see you next week where we hit another topic. Like, subscribe, go check out the book, and I will talk to you later.